So I'd love to start with just exploring the word integrity, that people use it a lot, right? But we don't actually slow down and think about what it means. Well, it shares the same root as integrate or integer. And so it's either yes or no. It's to integrate your word and your action. It's to do what you say you're going to do. Many organizations actually don't have clear agreements. They think they do, but then you go and read their job descriptions and they are very, very unclear, very, very sort of wishy-washy. And then we wonder why people don't do what they never really understood in the first place. I think part of it for leaders is to slow down, especially during the hiring process, and actually get clear about what is the job. Like literally, what are you accountable for producing? And then ask the person, are you willing to shake my hand and say, you can do this? Can you produce these results? Can you do these things? And eye to eye, because I don't want you to sign this piece of paper unless you can agree to it as a human being. And so I think that's where a lot of times the character is missing, that many people aren't ill-intended. Most people show up and want to do a good job, right? But they don't actually understand really the details of the job in the first place. And they just need a paycheck, or they think they understand, or the boss thinks it's this and they think it's that. So there's just a huge gap between the two, which creates trust issues that frankly don't need to be there. We just need to slow down and help people get clarity first. And then once they're clear, then we can ask them for a commitment. Then we can get their word, which is a form of integrity.
Yeah. And I see a lot of leaders will hear, hey, culture is important. I need to do something about that. They bring in a consultant. They go through this large culture exercise, and they never really did the foundation that you're talking about, wherever we're so clear on the value every role is designed to create, and the team members understand we've got the right structure in terms of how we create value and the support structure, around that. And so the team members get really frustrated. They kind of roll their eyes like, what are we doing here in this exercise when we're not even sure what we're supposed to do? So 100% agree with that. And on the other side, you could say, well, if you get culture right, it's going to drive for those things. And so order kind of matters in all of this. And if I go into a place, and I encourage folks that I work with, and it's not clear, it's on them as well to get clarity around it. Because if somebody just shows up to do a job and it's not clear for years on end, what are they doing? Like, we should be all driving for that clarity around, what am I supposed to do to create the value that this organization was designed to create? So talk about order and going after, because I know you have 5-month intense engagement, something like that, when you work with a client to get, and you've said it well, and I've listened to so many of your interviews. It's not about fixing an organization. It's really just identifying and moving in a direction of creating a lot more value, through culture. But how do you think about order? And do you actually touch on those things when you come in, getting the foundation right, et cetera?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, we'll spend a few hours with CEOs before we even engage in a proposal. So we're building a relationship built on that foundation right out of the gate as we're talking to prospects. And so that by the time we even get to a proposal, we've got a really solid relationship. And then we go to the next day, which is to engage the executive team. And we'll do a 4-hour orientation. And the orientation is just that. It's meant to orient all of us towards what is the value of going through this experience. Why are we going to do this 5 months together? Because if we're not all clear about it, then let's stop right here. There's no point in continuing. And too many times CEOs will kind of force this stuff down their people's throat, and then they wonder why it doesn't work. Well, because you didn't slow down at the beginning and create a sense of a North Star. What are we trying to accomplish together? And it's okay. A lot of times, frankly, people are very skeptical, and we welcome that. We welcome the skepticism because we know there's a lot of stuff out there that doesn't work, that's not terribly effective. Unfortunately, a lot of it falls into that leadership training bucket. And so we try to stay clear of leadership training. We try to create leadership experiences. We try to help foment really productive conversations and tremendous amount of insight. So when we do our 2.5-day retreat, which is the next step in the process, that 2.5 days is quite intense, frankly. We'll start at 8 a.m. Sometimes we don't finish until 7 or 8 p.m. on the first day. So it's quite intense, but a lot of it's not us training people, because we don't need more training. There's plenty of books. You've been to plenty of leadership trainings in the past. Our job is really to help the team have conversations that they've never had before, at depths they've never had before, so that we can live this, because that's really the ultimate difference maker, is that you can't train people on these concepts. You have to help people be the concepts. They have to live that way. And if you don't live in a different way going forward, then it's a waste of time. The culture is not going to change unless you're being a new version of yourself.
So give a couple of examples of after these retreats, how leaders go back and move the needle. The way I think about it, just essentially operationalizing the things that drive a culture that creates more and more value. And I always think, Tom, I want to connect culture to creating value. And everything we do is really practical, it's measurable. And I think it's measurable in all three buckets: material, emotional, and spiritual.
Yeah, well, let me just continue with that integrity theme, since we've already brought it up. There's lots of other stories, but I think this will resonate with your audience. If I were to ask your audience, how many of you are really busy? I'm sure many hands would be raised, right? And how many CEOs are feeling especially busy? Again, many people resonate with that. Well, how many of you CEOs think it's okay to show up late to a meeting, or think it's okay to not do what you said you're going to do as a follow-up to me because you're really busy and you're the CEO? Well, that's great, but guess what? That's sending a signal to the rest of the organization. And we had one CEO who literally he said it was like a spiritual experience almost, where he woke up from a dream in the middle of the night at the first night of our retreat. And he realized that he was doing exactly that. He was frustrated that the organization wasn't producing results. They weren't, as a collective 1,000 employees, they weren't delivering the results that he has been working really hard at for years to try to get. And he realized that one of the biggest reasons was because he wasn't doing what he said he would do, whether it was showing up for a meeting on time or following through like he said he would. I'll get that to you next Monday. And then he wouldn't. And he said he went to work on that one thing over the several weeks after the retreat. And he said, I'm seeing spontaneous acts of accountability everywhere. Just that one change for him as the leader, as the CEO, completely transformed that culture.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. We need to lead by example and actually do these things. And if integrity or high-performing team members do what they said they would as a behavior or something that we're all living as part of our cultural alignment tools, a lot of leaders don't think it applies to them. Everybody else should do this, but I shouldn't do it. So I think that gets to one of the things I was talking about earlier, where we can apply these 3 or 4 things. Might work for you, Tom, might not work for me. It all depends on how we apply it. But I think the first rule has to be live it by example. Other people will see it, right? So that's a pretty powerful part of your work.
It's most of the work, frankly, and it's not new. This is not a new concept, right? We've all heard this before, but you said it, you nailed it, right? That everyone thinks it's about the other people, not me. And so if you're a CEO that wants to take your team and take your organization to the next level, but you're not willing to do the hard work yourself, then don't waste your time, because you will just frustrate your people. It starts with you.
AWS has 30% of the cloud market around the world. So how do you minimize risk on this? You've been involved in some pretty big projects.
Yeah.
Your thought?
Yeah. So the thing I think about on something like this is a couple of things. A is that you have to have both a world-class operating playbook and a transformation playbook. And I tend to focus more today in kind of that transformation, reinvention playbook. But you have to have this truth-seeking, high standards, operational excellence playbook, and just not allow yourself to kind of get complacent, to get lazy relative to that. The other thing I think about is this concept of anti-fragile design. And what an anti-fragile system is it's not just resilient to change, it actually gets better with change, right? And so as you and I were talking about, when they get to the real fifth why of why this happened, I think it's going to come down to some type of single-threaded dependency that they had within one region and they didn't realize it. And it will set forth a set of re-architecting and scrutinizing, like how could one release, one probably bad configuration cause a system-wide issue like this? And how do we design a system that can't fail in that manner? So we not only prevent like this type of, I'm assuming as some sort of release error that happened or something like that, but an actual architecture that doesn't have a single threaded kind of dependency or weak link to it. So those are the two things that I think about relative to this. And then having a culture that allows for truth-seeking conversations without, kind of the blame game that can get closely tied to that kind of insight. And you have to be clear about the job to be done, right? The first job to be done is fix the issue. The second job to be done is then like, how do we design in this anti-fragile manner? The third issue is then, or job to be done is then like, all right, like where did personal accountability perhaps play a role in this and what should we do in that? But those are three different jobs. Don't do them all at the same time.
Yeah. Well, every couple of years, as we were talking about, when AWS goes down, it affects at least 3 of my businesses in a significant way. It's never that long. It's usually just a couple of days at most. But it kind of gets to almost like complacency. So I think there's business model complacency. Will this thing keep working? And then will our product or service, continually deliver and continually improve the experience for our customers out there? And
and then probably another one, which is like
Yeah.
kind of the key dependency complacency, right? Like I have a trusted vendor or a key customer that I just assume is always going to be there for me, to deliver for me, consume from me, and that's a dangerous assumption to make, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great category that all fits in there. Uh, when I think about the change or the pace of changes happening right now, I've heard you talk in podcasts plus your book around, if you thought change was fast around the dot-com bubble and what was happening back around 2000, today it's even faster. What do you think the biggest forces are going to be that are going to impact that for small, medium, and even large businesses? And I think a lot about small and mid-sized businesses because that's the majority of business out there.
Yeah. Well, I think as we outline in Big Bet Leadership, I think about kind of 3 macro changes tied together with this common thread that goes across all. So the 3 macro factors that we outlined as part of the hyper digital era, which is this era of what I think is going to be exhilarating change, which creates either opportunity and or challenges in your businesses. One is kind of technology, right? And so AI is just one. I think we've really had an exciting just recent era on stable coin, and I think that's going to be a transformative, kind of payments technology, computer vision, the promise of fusion energy. It's not going to stop at AI, but it's kind of easy to categorize them all under AI, and everything, right? The second is the shortage of skilled labor and the cost of skilled labor, which I think is going to hit every business. And, between the declining birth rate and the increasing aging of America, like that's a mega force that's just accelerating. Again, presents opportunities if you can figure out a business that either rides that mega force and or solves for that problem. That puts you in the driver's seat relative to the mega force. And then the third is just the indebtedness of our societies and the fact that, whether it's an inflationary pressure or a cut in social services or the chaos that I think is is not going to stop. If anything, it's going to just accelerate from an international standpoint. Like, we are in an era of chaos. And if your plan is, well, I'm going to wait until it's a little less chaotic, I think that's a high risk perspective to have. I think you need to figure out how to plan for that chaos. And then the thread that ties all of those together is the abundance, not just the abundance of investable capital, but it's investors like NVIDIA, Amazon, Microsoft, and private equity firms who have built a playbook that they have high confidence in, of like, how do we actually take on a use case, an industry, a company, and create something new and substantially better. And so, they've learned that playbook over the past, call it 30 years of digital transformation. I think that those are the four factors, and there's probably more, but those are the ones that I think about that are going to create this era, which gets to the thesis of big bet leadership, which is, not only are we not good at these types of transformations or reinventions of ourselves, but I think this is going to be the skill set of winning companies going forward, is that they have both world-class operations and they're systematic about how they reinvent themselves at a company, at a team, as an individual leader. And I think that ability to hold both of those as mandates for a leader and for a leadership team and for a business, I think, is the big change that's needed. Most companies don't think that way. Innovation or reinvention is a sporadic or, part-time hobby form. They don't prioritize the development of those types of skills. They don't have the clear language or frameworks to differentiate between them. They because there's some common words between the two of them, they think, oh, just because I'm a good operator, I know how to run a program in the reinvention half of my playbook, and flat out you don't, right? And history demonstrates that fact. So those are both the forces that we're talking about, as well as the mandate of building your, we'll call it reinvention big bet playbook to complement your world-class operating playbook, which still needs to be strengthened and operate and built upon.
Yeah, that all makes a ton of sense. Something that I think threads through all of it is change is really hard. Everybody talks about it. Thousands of leaders have written about it. I believe that we need to change our relationship with struggle. Because when it's hard, people think something's wrong, but all the opportunity in the world is in the struggle. It's like going to the gym, you get really fit. That was a very healthy struggle. I think for business leaders, it's a really healthy struggle to develop these capabilities. If we could change that mindset. So how have you looked at that? Because the projects that you've been involved with, the teams you've been part of, obviously world-class, winning in such a big way, they didn't run from struggle. They leaned into it. So talk about that a little bit.
Well, I would just say amen to everything you just said, which is it is the struggle that make things rewarding. And as an organization, too many organizations think of this as like a transformation or a program, but it's that, but it's also just a core organizational habit and DNA, a muscle capacity, just like, as you reference, I use that reference all the time. Like, you got to go to the sweaty gym all the time so that you have the potential, the opportunity for potentially having a championship moment, right? And yeah, so I wrote about that in the free ebook. You mentioned my business manifesto, which is like, you can't wait until you need to do this. You need to do it when you have the advantage of a healthy business and some time to do it. That's when you have to make fast, dramatic change in compressed periods of time. That's when you really run short on options, and you won't like the medicine that you're going to have to take with that.
If you're listening to this, think about growing a business for 15 years. Blood, sweat, tears, not paying yourself for years, getting your business to finally be of value, and then losing it. Just because I didn't have the long-term game in mind. I didn't have that patient ambition. of growing something over a longer period of time that was more foundational. And yeah, that's why I keep bringing up the message that, we overestimate sometimes what we can do in the short term. We underestimate, if you just have a little bit of patient ambition, what you can really build.
Yeah, initially, I think a lot of them that I get, because I love working with startups and everything in between, all the way up to really big public companies. They're making assumptions that they have no idea whether or not they're right. I see a lot of that. It's like your typical startup company hockey stick graph, or you're going into a new market, all these things. It looks great on our spreadsheet, but now we've got customers and people and everything else involved. And then I think there's really big limiting beliefs that we all have about what's possible in the future. And I think it's our job to keep pushing the boundaries of creating value to chip away or modify those limiting beliefs going in. I used to say it, John, and I've been saying this for a couple of decades now, I'm very patient with a strong sense of urgency.
Love it.
So like I'm super patient as long as everybody's doing the right work. If they're not doing the right work, then forget patience. Like we need to change something, right?
I love that approach. And I think a lot of times, maybe when you were saying what you were saying there, we go into ventures, or we go into the new year, or we go into this new product line or service with uninformed optimism. It's kind of like, oh, this is all going to work out perfectly. And I think on the other side, sometimes the financial analysts and us take the budget or the projections and, we divide it by 2 and multiply it by 50% because there's so many things that could happen and we're not sure what's going to happen, and so we get this dose of informed pessimism that turns to informed optimism ultimately. But we go through these cycles every time you start something new or looking to build something new. And so I love this concept of, having patient urgency, as you mentioned, because we also need to move. We need to achieve our 90-day rocks. Our companies work in 90-day segments. We've got to achieve the goals. So we have that. We also don't try and overshoot. And I think that's what a lot of entrepreneurs sometimes do. And they get disappointed when they don't achieve success in the first year or second year of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, when I go and I work with startups, and I took one over about 18 months ago that was a failed kids banking app, and changed the name. We call it Dinner Table. Now we're building a community of families globally, raising kids that create value in the world. And we have over 18 months, over 40,000 parents in our community. I think in 3 years, it'll be millions going in. But it's been interesting. There's about 120 investors, and there's all this pressure, tell us what projections are going to be for the next 3 years and all that. It's like, I literally can't give you anything meaningful until we get the foundation in place and we see what's getting traction and the return on how we're pouring gas on different things. Then I can give you a more meaningful projection into the future. But until that happens, we're building this foundation for growth. Now, you talk about that a little bit differently than I do, but I think it's the same thing. What's our foundational readiness for growth? And you're talking, I think it's organizational capacity, right, in your book?
Yeah, it's operational capacity, and it's also cash flow. How fast can your company afford to grow? And that was a big mistake, Lee, that I made. You talk a lot, in your book, the most important number. When you're trying to grow a business, one of the most important numbers at that particular phase, at least for your finance team, should be how fast can your company afford to grow based on the cash flow it's generating. And if you try and grow too quick, well, what ends up happening is if you try to grow 20%, but your cash flow is telling you can only grow 5%, where's that other 15% come from? Well, it comes from banks. It comes from investors. You start losing a little bit of control or equity in your business, or you're indebted to the bank and your balance sheet gets over levered. And so those aren't good ways to grow as well. So part of growing your business appropriately is you're growing with the cash flow that it's generating, right? Even to the story you're talking about, sometimes, we'd all love to have millions of users right now, but are we willing to spend X amount of dollars on marketing, or do we need to grow at a more steady pace so we build the foundation correctly? And I think that's something I spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs and businesses on, is getting the fuel for growth. Have you run into that yourself as well?
Well, I have, and early on, just pouring more money into something doesn't necessarily mean that's even going to work. And so for me, it's about, let's get a solid foundation. Let's package and test in the areas that make sense. Often there's an iteration, or in the case that I brought up, it's a complete reset of the entire business. And then when we see what's starting to work, then pouring money can make a difference. There's a lot of cases where we know this is working, we just don't have cash to go do it. So let's go figure it out in some way. But the other thing I noticed, and you probably remember from my book, Your Most Important Number, is it was a very cash intensive business. The aerospace case study that I built in there sold it for 9 figures in 2016. And cash was my by far most important number. I always thought it was super easy to calculate. I mean, it's what you actually have to work with at any point in time. So we had tens of millions of dollars in inventory. That definitely came out of cash. We had tens of millions of dollars in equipment. That came out of cash. We had receivables. We had all of that. But there was so much we could leverage along the way because we never had to raise money for, outside money. We had a pretty big credit line, but I would never let it go more than 50% without making adjustments. And our customers would work with us. Our suppliers would work with us. I mean, there was so much that we had to leverage. So it's not just, for me, I discovered, John, it wasn't as simple as, here's a formula on a spreadsheet and this is how you think about it and you make all decisions that way. Because if we could grow 40%, we had an opportunity, but we didn't have the cash to do it. We would also go to everyone in our circles to figure out how we can get through that. And I love the fact that unlike your first venture, and I want to get into the two different stories here pretty quick. I never had to give up control. I always had the majority interest in everything going on. And even those that had equity, if they left the company, they would have to sell it back. I mean, we still controlled all of it. So I love being in that position. So if you can, I mean, I agree with the cash flow is like everything. It's the lifeblood of a business. Talk about the two journeys and the differences and some of the things that you learned. And maybe we get into some of the 7 principles too.
Well, that's maybe a great segue. But what I want to touch on first, if I can, Lee, before I move forward, is what you just said, is if I asked 100 small and medium-sized businesses, how many of you are doing strategic capital planning for your business? I just see a bunch of eyes looking at me going, what are you talking about right now? And what you just mentioned in your case example is you were doing strategic capital planning for your business. It was like, no, we have an opportunity to grow 40%. So how are we going to fund this? Where are all the sources it can come so I can still protect the equity and control of the business, not overlever the balance sheet, not put ourselves in a bad position, but strategically plan this capital that we need to grow. Small and medium-sized businesses do not have that in place. So what they do is they go 40%, let's go 40%, let's make it happen. And they make it happen and they look back and they go, oh crap, now my balance sheet's in trouble. Oh crap, I bought these investors in are now telling me what to do. Oh crap, I just lost control of my business. And that kind of is the segue to my first story, which is, we grew this company to $55 million in global revenues over 15 years, like I mentioned. It was an industry that I loved. We had the most amazing culture, the most amazing team. This was a rocket ship. We were going to take this thing to the moon. It was the most amazing business I've ever built. But along the way, I made myself and the company vulnerable. I wanted to grow so quick that we didn't capital plan appropriately. We over-levered the balance sheet. We invested in areas that were losing money, and instead of killing them, we kept investing more money in the losing areas to try and fix it, which is not really a good proposition. And so we had some divisions that were really, really profitable. We were taking the really, really good profits, putting it against really bad divisions that were losing money. We had an over-levered balance sheet. I brought in some people to the company I didn't vet necessarily appropriately. The idea was, well, let's delever this balance sheet, bring on some private equity to bring us to the next level. We bring in the private equity, lost control of the company. I now, 6 months later after bringing the private equity, get fired. I owned 8% of the company when that happened. I started with 33%, a little bit better. But what happened? What was I thinking? And I really didn't have my life plan, my long-term life plan aligned to my business plan. I didn't know why I was growing. I thought maybe you'd call it ego, I just wanted to build a big business. But I had zero capital planning. I was growing way faster than our company could afford to grow. I was investing in businesses that were losing money. My capital strategic plan was way off. And I put myself and the business in that vulnerable position. And that was painful. I mean, the day, driving home from getting fired from the very own company I started, my vision, my business, my team, my best friends in this business, I lost my entire identity. I lost my email. I lost my calendar. I had my whole life was in it. I didn't have a work email and a business email. I had my work. That was it. I spent all my time doing it. And that was a rude awakening that really, really hurt. And it's because I didn't do some of the things that you talked about in your example. I wasn't paying attention to my most important numbers in that particular period.
25 years as CEO for a company like WD-40, that's incredible because most CEOs, at best last just a few years on average. What was your secret to that?
I loved what I was doing, number one. And it's a great brand and had lots of opportunity, to be able to work in so many countries around the world and enjoy so many cultures. And I guess we performed okay, so the board didn't fire me, right?
Yeah, so you grew it probably 7-8-fold in your tenure there in terms of total value, right?
In total value, 10 times, basically. We took the market cap from about 300 million to, when I left, around 3 billion plus. Sales-wise, about 7x the sales. And we took the brand to 176 countries around the world. So now that blue and yellow can with a little red top sits on shelves in many countries around the world. Still looks the same as it does here, except some of the words are in different languages. But certainly an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, I believe if I got the stat right, it's in 8 out of 10 households
in the United States. Yes.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I've gone through lots of those cans. So when I was a kid, I used to race motorcycles. I worked on my own vehicles, and what an amazing product. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And I know you're an avid player of guitars. You told me you have 50. One of the uses that we were told was people using it on steel guitar strings. I don't know if you've ever done that.
I haven't. I play very aggressively. Whenever I play live, I have to change my strings every day or they'll break because I'm bending.
Yeah.
So I don't have the corrosion issue, but I could see where it actually really help and kind of bring life back into them again.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. No question. Culture is a really big deal to you. It's really big to me. I feel like there's so much talk about culture and engagement that to me sounds like business virtue signaling.
Mm-hmm.
More than something meaty you can really sink your teeth into. And I'm a believer that the goal of every organization should be to connect culture to creating value. That's how I look at it, and making it come to life. And you talk in your book about, and I've heard you on a number of podcasts, love the micro interview that you did, a tribal culture. So maybe let's start there and how you came up with that, and then how you made culture come to life. And it wasn't just something that looks good, feels good, and sounds good, but actually created great performance too.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things. Number one, I think business has not only an opportunity, but a responsibility to make a positive difference in the world. And it's sad, and the latest Gallup numbers, or the ones that came out in January, sort of verified this, that in the United States, engagement in organizations has dropped to 31%, which means, 69% of people who go to work every day are disengaged. This doesn't make sense to me, because I think success in an organization is what I call the will of the people times strategy. So we can have a great strategic plan, right? Write it up, take it to some smart professor, and he says, congratulations, you got 70 out of 100 for your strategic plan. You hit on all the right places. But if only 30% of your people are going to work every day engaged and enthusiastically executing against that plan, that's like 30 times 70 is a number, which means you're not really getting value out of the execution. But if 80% did, then 80 times 70 is a much bigger number. And that's why it sort of baffles me that leaders don't get it, that it's not just about strategy, it's about the power of execution. So if you go back then to think about, what really do people want? Well, we worked out that there are a couple of things. People want to go and work at a place where they feel and are treated like they belong. We learned that from Maslow in Maslow's hierarchy to self-actualization. The first two rungs of that is, am I safe, and am I, providing for myself? The next one is love or belonging. So you need to create that. The second one is people want to go to work at a place where what they do matters and is being recognized. It's making a difference. Thirdly, people want to go to a place where there's psychological safety, a reduction in fear.
And we did that by taking the word failure out of our organization and replacing it with learning moments. And the number one responsibility of a tribal leader is to be a learner and a teacher. That's why we're there. And then people want to be at a place where they're free to make decisions. And that's why a hierarchical set of values is so important, because people want sort of guardrails, if you will, to be able to operate in, but they don't want to be quacking up the hierarchy every time they need to make a decision. So if you put all those things in place, they're the attributes of a tribal culture. Now, when I talk about tribes, I'm not talking about some indigenous group. Tribalism goes way back to the beginning of mankind. Ugg the caveman was a tribal guy. So, and then finally, tribes have just causes. And our just cause was a group of people that came together to protect and feed each other. That's why we went to work every day. So you wrap all that up, and that was really the basis behind, or the thinking behind a tribe.
Yeah. And I love the example in the book. If a team member asks you, how are you doing? What they're really asking is, am I going to be okay in the organization with the way things are at? And I found the numbers incredibly high from a percentage standpoint. So I actually wrote them down out of the book. When you do a survey and you had a few questions on there, I love to tell people that I work at WD-40 Company, 98%. Incredible. I am excited about WD-40 Company's future direction, 94%. I know what results are expected of me, 96%. In my experience, and I work with hundreds of companies, it's less than 30%. They're really clear. And I respect my coach. So it was 97%. Just incredible. So you must have been super intentional about how you operationalized things around that, especially expectations.
Yeah. An earlier book that I wrote with my mentor, Dr. Ken Blanchard, the 1 Minute Manager, was called Helping People Win at Work. And the whole basis was, we're not here to mark your paper, we're here to help you get an A. So our philosophy was, are we clear about what an A looks like? So we would intentionally, at the beginning of the year, sit with those we had the privilege to lead as their coach, and we would agree what an A looks like. If it walked in the door today, what would it look like? And then my role as the coach was to help you get that A. So we didn't wait till the end of the year to have that conversation. We'd have ongoing conversations. Lee, where do you think you are? What's getting in your way? What roadblocks you're encountering? What do you need? What training do you need? Now, that's why 97% of people respected their coach, because when we asked them why, they said the coach is here to help me win. Now, remember, their coach, in other terms, is their manager or their boss. Most people leave organizations because they hate their boss or they don't respect their boss. The 97% of our people, as you quoted, respected the coach because the coach was there to help them step into the best version of themselves.
When I look at project work, I look at project management as really, there's two sides of the coin, right? There's the people side and there's the process side. And everybody wants to focus on the process side, which is activity A takes 5 days, followed by B takes 5 days, followed by C takes 10 days, total duration 20 days, right? That's the process side. That's math, basic stuff. Anybody can do that, right? To me, it's how did you get to A, B, and C? And then who owns A, B, and C? Because A might be done by Joe and B is done by Fred and C is done by Jane. And each one of those people get motivated in a different way. And you have to talk to them in a different way. Some people like to feel the pressure. Some people run away from pressure. So you have to think about, how am I going to talk to this person? How am I going to pull the information out of that person that I need? Sometimes I have one client who says that half my job is, going back to the old Charlie Brown cartoons, the psychiatrist is in, here's, give me your nickel, because I just listen to people. And my job is to sit there and listen to them. Sometimes they just need to blast, right? Just vent. Then you can get to the business at hand. So those are the kind of things that I think if you're just trying to check the box, you won't get. So I think that's really what causes it to be a commodity.
Yeah, I see, and you don't know a lot about me, but I've started 8 companies from scratch. One was a global aerospace business, had 500 team members in one location, but then people dotted around the world, thousands of customers in 60 countries. It was an incredible business. But there were lots of projects to be completed. And we'd always start with, this is what completed exactly looks like. And then in my brain, it was always managing the project by milestones. And all milestones were critical because a day late, as you talk about in the book, the whole project's a day late, day early. The whole project can be a day early. But also sustaining it as a project, like, keeping the ongoing value created happening and improving over time. So I think about both sides of that, and every company is just a collection of projects being managed, to completion, to put something in place, and ongoing to continually create the value. Is that in alignment with how you think about it?
Oh, 100%. A lot of our clients are technically oriented. Like you said, Caterpillar is one of our clients. And of course, we do big projects for them, or we do some work in the semiconductor space as well. And when you're doing these projects, time matters, deadlines matter. But the other key that you're talking about really is the people side, in that I could probably take an old project plan that's very close. Like you had multiple projects over the whole time you were doing that at that company. You had probably hundreds and hundreds of projects. You could have taken one that was similar to the last one and just blew the dust off and changed the name of the project title and say, here we go. But the problem is that the reason that doesn't work is because the people assigned could be different. Their availability could be different, which then drives the duration to be different. Different people have different strengths and weaknesses. And of course, we always work to maximize our strengths, minimize our weaknesses. So you and I might do the same exact thing. We might do it in a slightly different way, because maybe I want to do this piece first because I hate it. I just want to get it out of the way. And that's going to let me do the other thing I like. And you might say, no, I like to do this one first because I enjoy it. And that'll maybe give me some data that I can use. But in the end, we deliver the same result, right? So and what I can't do is I can't dictate to you how to do your work, because you're going to be the best expert at how you need to perform, how you need to do your work. And you might say, well, a functional manager or technical manager should know what all their people are doing and be able to assign durations. I don't think that's the case. You have hundreds of employees, or maybe it's just dozens under your direct control, but you don't necessarily know on any given week everything that person's working on, but they do. And you may not realize that they've been pulled off to work to solve some customer issue that's come up, but they do. And Joe might be this great guy who is willing to work weekends. What you don't know is he's got his kids this weekend and he can't do that. So again, you have to look at the people whose name is going to be on the activity and say, what do you need to do this work and how long do you need to do it? Because they would be the expert at that. And so to me, it's about team-based, collaborative project management planning for purposes. But the other thing you said was really important, is the plan is just the plan. And one of the excuses we hear all the time is, the plan's just going to change. So why bother doing it in the first place? Because you can't just wander around the wilderness blindly. You've got to say, I'm going to go west. The team has decided west is the best direction to get us to our goal, which you also said very importantly, we have to know our goal, right? What is our final objective? What does the end really look like? And we decide to walk west. Well, because it's a collaborative team, somebody's going to say, wait a minute, this isn't working. We might be 2 or 3 days down the path and they go, we're getting further away from where we want to go. We need to course correct. And that's why you have to have these weekly or every 2-week meetings where you say, well, here's the plan. The plan was fantastic, but it's static. So based on where we are today, where are we on this map? And then if things are done, great, mark them off. If things are not done, when will they be done? Or, hey, what do we know today? We didn't know 2 weeks ago when we built this plan. We need to add that and make sure we're still on track. So a project plan is a living, breathing document that's going to change for the life of the project. So anybody who thinks that once you get your plan put together, it's cast in stone and never changes, nothing can be further from the truth. If you have a plan that's not changing, something is wrong.
But I'm really curious, what was it like watching your dad grow this business before you formally joined the business?
Yeah, when people ask you about your childhood, it's always a strange question because we only have one, right? So there's nothing really to compare it to. But what I remember from being a young child when he was starting the business, first of all, it was unusual from the perspective that we were living in Japan, because that's where he started the company to service the U.S. military shipments in and out of Japan. So I loved growing up in Japan. It's a culture that embraces children. It's very welcoming, and I felt very well supported. As for my parents, starting a business is all consuming. So in a sense, he never stopped working. And sometimes he would work at home and we'd be, playing around him. And other times he'd be on long business trips. But I think from an early age, what it showed me is that there's no limits to how hard you can work. And Crown is a very different animal today than it was back in the 60s. But if you're going to start your own business, be prepared for some incredible hard work. At least that was the case with him.
Yeah, that must have been really interesting to watch. And I've started 8 companies from scratch myself, and the early ones, wow, 80, 100-hour weeks, sometimes years on end. So that hard work, but it never really felt like work for me. Did it feel like work for your dad, or was it a passion project?
Ooh, I think it was absolutely passion. We used to joke around that Crown was his favorite child. And yeah, I think he absolutely was a labor of love. Today he's 85. I think he's sort of done with working quite that hard, but I do think he enjoyed it and the challenge of it, because the other thing, now that you're asking me the question, that I really took away from watching him is that from an early stage, Crown was in multiple countries, and we expanded first throughout Asia and then to other continents. And when you have a multi-location company, especially one with such a broad global footprint, it's really difficult to get them all functioning well, right? It's like a game of whack-a-mole. You finally get that problem child right, and another one starts misbehaving. So I feel like he used to say to us, if I could only get them all working at the same time, right? And I think that's maybe a little bit less true today, but it's to some extent true, because sometimes the problem children will change due to macroeconomic factors or a different manager or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, COVID, all kinds of things that can take us off our game. I mentioned before we started recording that I watched the fireside chat with you and your father, and he would be such an interesting person to have a long conversation with. The experiential wisdom that came out, and almost everything he said was incredible. I like the controlled risk piece of it when he was talking about that. How was that sort of permeated into operationalizing itself within your company?
Well, I think we go through chapters, right? And one thing I do remember from when I was very young and we were very much a startup is that my mother would get very stressed out at the degree of risk he was taking, right? Because it was sort of our money. and I think you have to take maybe less control risks in the beginning. And then as you mature, then you have a little more at stake, and they're probably a lot more controlled. But so when I hear him speak about controlled risks, sometimes I smile, because I think in the beginning they weren't quite as controlled, but thankfully we're still here to tell the story.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's normal for a startup company to be kind of on the edge for the first year, 2, 3 years, maybe going through. And then I do think, and he made the point that at least the way it landed on me, you don't want to bet the farm. So if you start winning, don't take big risks because now you think you know everything. Be really careful. And that was sort of the controlled risk message that I got out of it. It makes a lot of sense. But I do remember the first year, my first business, I think I almost went out of business 15 times.
I think that for our company, the period was even longer. And it wasn't because he was taking big risks, but he had to empower other people. And he was operating in some frontier locations that maybe had challenging labor laws, or it wasn't really democracy. And so he had multiple cases where overnight they had to fold in, whether it be Iran during the revolution, or if you have to close because there's a lawsuit that you just can't sustain, right? So it wasn't just about him continuing to take big risks. When you're global, you just by definition are taking bigger risks because it's less in your control. You can't necessarily know everything about the legal framework in every market. And to some extent, we're still learning that.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my companies, it was an aerospace aftermarket support business. So we repaired, overhauled parts for operators all over the world. We had 2,000 customers in about 60 countries. And, thinking about, this is a little bit of a sidebar, but the conversations around tariffs right now and what's going on there, my experience was in all of those countries, not one of them was an equitable, fair exchange of value. There were always extra barriers put in place, aside from just, geographical location. Uh, so I've always thought it'd be really nice if we could level the playing field so it's an absolute fair exchange of value everywhere. Talk a little bit about that, because this has to impact your business too.
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest businesses we have that it involves shipping goods across borders is our relocation business. And that is really moving people first and foremost. It started because we were a household goods mover, and it's expanded into things like immigration and real estate. And that sector, there are no duties if you do it right. If you screw it up, you're going to pay a ton of duty. But the way it's supposed to be done, it's not a dutiable item because it's used, it's not for resale. So the tariffs don't directly impact our business that much. The other B2B businesses we have, things like workspace, information management, they're either less reliant on shipping or they're primarily domestic. And so the tariffs, again, they don't directly impact the services we provide or the cost of the services we provide as much as they impact our clients' motivation to spend money. So many of our clients, it's not that they're impacted by tariffs so much, but we're seeing a huge degree of caution in spending money because of the uncertainty. They're not really sure what the future holds, if their own country will be impacted or it won't be impacted. So that's been challenging. So for example, if we were hired to fit out a major office complex or a new hotel development to store the goods that they need, to deliver them as they needed them, we've seen a lot of those projects being put on hold. So it's wonderful that we won we were awarded the business, but we're on standby, and that impacts your revenue. So that's really, I would say, how the whole tariff landscape is affecting us.
So in your book, Make Some Noise, The Unconventional Road to Dominance, I love that book, read it over the last week. And, kind of curious, I mean, you really make this distinction between, it's not about the features, it's about how people feel. Was that immediately obvious to you when you went to Harley Davidson?
I wish that it was, because and you would have thought, Lee, that at that point in time that would be obvious, because Harley Davidson, just the name would engender feelings and reactions in people. But what we believed, and to my amazement, what just about every business in the world I encounter today believes, is that what they do, what they make, what they sell is the reason for existence. And if they can do that consistently and do it consistently better, that they'll always be competitive. And what we learned, to our kind of horror, and what I've learned to marshal and challenge and use for advantage is, Matt, if a business is known for what it does, it's not competitive, because unless you're the only people in the world that are doing what you're doing, you've got the cure for infectious diseases. Yeah, the world's going to find a path to your door, but everything's commoditized now. And there's, nothing that anyone can sell me that I can't get from somebody else, probably for less money. So when all you're known for is what you do, you're not competitive. It's impossible to build preference. You build lawnmowers. Well, so do 50 other companies. What else have you got?
Yeah, and the ones that win, just kind of thinking through it, because this has been your world, is it always because they were better at building community and emotional connection with customers?
If you look at, in my mind, the businesses that people like, businesses that people love, are fond of, or will actually speak of and it's kind of rare to find people that will just openly, recommend or talk about a business, no matter how big the business is, are those businesses that have made it a point to make their entire approach to business more about elevating people and plugging into, this human species to humanize their business so people could associate, human values and qualities with those businesses. Businesses that do that outcompete those that don't, because now the market and your customers feel like they know you. And if they know you, they're more inclined to, prefer you over businesses that they don't know. And if you do things for human beings that they like or that please them, humans come back for more of that. We can't turn that off inside of us. We are drawn to things that please us and delight us. And if you're making an effort to delight me, to go beyond simply selling me a piece of hardware or a piece of software, whatever that might be, that I can sense in everything that you're doing with me and for me and on my behalf is driven by a passionate desire to please me and delight me. I like you. I'm coming back for more of you. I'm attaching human qualities to your business. It's beyond, I see you beyond the thing that you're trying to sell me.
Yeah. Yeah. What did it feel like? I want to be part of that, all the way through. And I love the concept in your book around R&R. What do we want people to remember and repeat? And I find it wild when I talk to, a lot of CEOs, so what do you do? What's your, and if I ask the question, what do your customers say about you? What do you want them to say about you? They don't have a very good answer to that. And that is interesting.
It's never not blown my mind, because I can go any place on the planet if I'm consulting for somebody or consulting for a business and they call me, and it's always the first thing that I do. If I'm in a boardroom somewhere or an executive committee meeting of some kind, and I've got everybody sitting there at a table, I said, I'll just spell out a real easy scenario, something they can all identify with. Say, a customer of your business or an investor, someone that someone that you would claim to have a relationship with, a great relationship, maybe somebody that you just met, is sitting on a plane next to somebody who would be the biggest client, the biggest customer this business has ever had. Right. And they're having a conversation about a need that this potential whale customer has. And that need that person has just happens to be what your business does, who you are. So the person who knows you is about to describe you to this other person and what could be the most valuable conversation that will ever take place about your business. What would you want that person to say? Now you tell everybody, you got 90 seconds to write that down. And they'll write it down, they'll pass it forward. If there's 6 people at the table, I'll get 6 completely different answers. And I said, do you see a problem here? And I said, if you're the leadership of this business who arguably know it better, or certainly should know it better than anybody here, because you set the tone and the tenor for everybody working here. If you don't have this unanimous responsibility of who you are, who you do things for, why you do it, why people should prefer you, how can you expect your employees to know that? And then how can you expect the market to know that? If we don't have agreement in this room, you see, we have a pretty big problem. And it's, to your point, Lee, it's everywhere. Or marketing people can solve that. No, we're not talking about marketing. I think that the leadership of the business sets the tone for the business.
And why do you think that is? Is it that, hey, the one or two of the leaders, the CFO, the founder, the CEO, they understand us, so they should assume everybody else does? I don't even think they fully understand it.
I'm quite sure that they don't, Lee, because what I will typically get is pushback, and I'm sure you hear this too. Listen, look, we are laser focused on efficiency. We are laser focused on continuously improving the quality of our products and our services and our activities and all those things that we do. Of course you are. Who isn't? Find me somebody who's doing crappy work on purpose. There's not many of them out there. That's the basic table stakes of business. And if you're not thinking about the reputation of your business, who you are as people and what you represent in the marketplace, if you're not actively managing, your reputation, what's being said about you, someone else is going to do it for you. And why would you ever want that to happen? And you always have to tell people, and I'm sure you see this too, Lee, that you guys aren't the cure for cancer. You believe 100% in what you're doing and you're really good at it. And that's not, and if the whole world knew that, you'd have 100% of, the market. And you certainly wouldn't be talking to me or any other consultant because you'd be off buying your own, private islands somewhere. The world doesn't work that way. Being good at something is the entry point now in business. If it ever wasn't, right? You have to stand for something else that transcends all of that. And that's not a marketing thing. And please don't try to delegate this to your marketing department. They can't do that for you.